Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Fundraisers podcast. I'm delighted to be joined here today by a special friend, Mike Lints. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Some of you will remember Mike as the partner at Golden Gate Ventures, right? Responsible for fundraising, responsible for Series B portfolio management. Other people, however, will remember other aspects about you, right? For example, you've had this accident when you were a kid on a bike, and that's just developed this sheer determination and focus where you're actually doing marathons and Ironman races and so on. We're going to talk about that as well. We're also going to talk about how other people remember you for abandoning your corporate life, right?
Yes.
And getting out of that rat race, hamster wheel that many people are in. And you started very early on in your life, your own startup. Way ahead of its time, right? It was way before Google Cloud, AWS, and you had that idea, you sold it for a pot of gold. Others will remember you for being invited by Rotterdam EDB to develop the youth EDB, right? What an immense experience that must have been. And obviously others will remember you for the works that you do at a social community level, right? Or being remembered as a Dutch Karate Kid, right? So
exactly,
well, a lot of things. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. A few months ago when we caught up, I remember leaving that meeting feeling really energized. I remember being somewhat inspired as well. And I felt like your story needs to be shared on this platform. I think everybody needs to hear it. Everything that you've been through, right? Whether it's about how you do your fundraising, whether it's about your entrepreneurship journey, or just you as a person full of determination and, love of life, right?
Yeah.
So I want to start with the first question. And some of these questions I've actually got from other people that I've been talking to. And I said, Mike's coming on the show. And they were like, oh, remember to ask him this, remember to ask him this. So I'm going to start off with a very simple one about your early life experiences, right? Whether it's from your childhood or whether it's from your family values or in your early career. How has that shaped who you are as a person today? And how has that shaped the way that you think as an investor?
Yeah, I think when I remember the early days, the first thing that comes to mind is just my parents. My father passed away a few years back, but he was always adamant about us not looking at the ground. So whenever we were walking, he always said, Mike, head high and look forward. And he kept saying it whenever we would do groceries or just go for a family walk. And I couldn't really understand why he sort of instilled that same sentence over and over and over again. And it still sticks with me because his mantra was, you should always look forward. Doesn't matter the situation that you're in, you should always be looking forward. You're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. Always try to look forward, and I think that has shaped the way we raise our own kids, but it also shaped the way that I just look at business and I look at life in general.
Interesting. Sorry to hear about the passing. Yeah, and great words of wisdom, and it's definitely impacted the way you do your work now, right?
Yeah.
At the time when you started your startup, what was the rationale for choosing tech at that time, and what was it about specific? Because I read up and you guys were going to build a compare website or something, right?
Yeah.
Like go compare, and then it's kind of pivoted to more data, right? So
I've always had a fascination for technology. I've been taking apart and putting together computers since I was 9 or 10 years old. So I always wanted to be in the technology space. And again, that was inspired by my dad because he was he used to manage a mainframe for a local energy company in the Netherlands. So my inspiration with computers my fascination basically led me to do a study within computer science and engineering. So naturally, my first job was within a bank in tech. So I was part of their e-commerce department. So the moment one of my neighborhood friends, Martijn, he had this crazy idea. He said, Mike, you've built this comparison website for ING Bank back in the day. I want to make this all comparison website that's going to be like a global platform, and everyone's going to compare prices of items. Like, that's such a weird idea. Luckily, I spoke with his brother, Maurice, who was more level-headed. So Martijn was like the big dreamer. Maurice was kind of more level-headed. And he said, I think we should start off like lower ambition and think of what do companies need at this point in time. And a lot of companies, smaller like SME firms, were thinking about outsourcing their infrastructure to these big firms like Capgemini, et cetera. And we said we can do this better and cheaper. So we literally started outsourcing IT services for small companies, which eventually led us to building our own little data center.
Amazing journey. So look, as an entrepreneur myself and knowing a lot of other entrepreneurs, some of the biggest challenges you have, especially when you're starting out, right, is about you want to scale, you want to do the big things, right? But you're bootstrapping. And I know you guys bootstrapped for the whole period of 6 years, never raised any money, right? I want you to tell us, how did you do that? Like, you know, how did you refrain from going to the market, getting money, and how did you make it sustainable? And how did you handle those challenges for revenue, right? And profitability?
So, and this probably tells my age as well. So, back in the day...
Happy birthday. It was your birthday yesterday as well.
I'm officially old.
Getting younger.
Hopefully. We had an interesting start because we had a launching client that basically said, hey, those services that you guys are offering, it just makes sense for our business. So we were able to generate revenue fairly early on. The issue was when we were looking to scale the business and really wanted to get the data center up and running and trying to get to sort of a different level in terms of scalability and growth. Venture was not a thing in the Netherlands in those days. So we didn't have, as you would have now, you would knock on a VC's door, you kind of make your plan and try to present it. So what we did was we sold the data center solution as a kind of a long tail product. And then for the short-term revenue, we did consultancy.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time doing consultancy work, and that generated immediate instant revenue. And that's financed the data center business.
The consulting work wouldn't have been recurring revenue though, right?
No.
It would have been more like just to keep the lights on. How did you scale though? And did you scale actually? Did you scale beyond Holland, or were you?
No, so we stayed. It was a Dutch company. We remained in Holland, but we scaled countrywide. So at some point we had customers in Groningen for the Dutch folks that are listening, in Amsterdam, in Maastricht. So we were covering the entire Netherlands.
Okay, how many employees did you have before you sold it?
So we were at, I think, 27 or 28 employees the moment we sold the company. Yeah.
Wow, not bad. And how old were you at the time when you sold?
This must have been, I think I was like 29 or 30 or something when the company got acquired.
So around the age of 30 then, let's say, you were invited by Rotterdam EDB to say, hey, look, we like what you've done and this whole VC thing that you're into. Could you help us basically transfer that knowledge to all the other aspiring entrepreneurs that are coming through and transfer that data and knowledge from all those big CEOs? I read that you had CEO of ABN AMRO, CEO of ING, was it CEO of Unilever, Goldman Sachs as well, was it? Like
the big guys,
the big guns, right? You must have picked up so much knowledge. Like people read books to kind of understand, how CEOs think and what they should do. But did you get daily interaction with these guys? Was it pretty much learning from them and passing that knowledge on, or?
Yeah, it was a weird moment in life because folks at the Economic Development Board were asked for their sort of life accomplishments, and I was continuously asking, what am I doing here? We had the chairman of the United Nations was also the chairman of the International Advisory Board. So I was in a group of just well-versed, experienced CEOs, chairmen, and for me it was an amazing learning journey. But at the same time, they were trying to learn about this young and up-and-coming generation. So they saw me as sort of a gateway to this kind of young entrepreneur that was heavily involved in technology and lifestyle companies. something that they were further removed from. It was very much a synergetic relationship. But in all fairness, I learned so much in that era.
What was it specifically? What lessons and takeaways would you have to share with us on that?
The one story that I just keep telling everyone was just the level of their preparation was just unheard of. The way they approach a meeting. So at some point we had a meeting of young entrepreneurs, and the chairman of one of the largest soccer football clubs. I can't say soccer.
Yeah.
I have to say football.
Say football.
Football clubs in the Netherlands said, I'll spend some time with this group, and we can just talk about ideas and concepts for the city of Rotterdam. So I arrived to the meeting, and he was already sitting in the meeting room. And this was one of the busiest businessmen in the Netherlands. And he was sitting there, well prepared. He knew who was in the room. He knew our backgrounds. And he was just sitting back, reading his newspaper, and said, "Hey, welcome." I was like, "Oh man, this is my meeting." And he says, "Welcome to me."
Right.
I feel like I was 1-0 down already. Because he was so well prepared. So this the one thing that I learned, specifically when it comes to fundraising, is whenever I go into these meetings, I overly prepare myself in terms of what is their background, what have they done, what are they looking for, what is their investment history, just having that understanding. So that was one of the biggest takeaways for me.
Did you speak to that CEO and ask him why, and what was the rationale for doing that? Is it something he's always done in life, or did you probe that?
Yeah, so at some point after the meeting, was able to meet him a few other times, and I think at some point it was a gala dinner, and I was fairly nervous kind of speaking to him, but I was like, like how do you get to where you are? And his word was literally like, just preparation.
Preparation.
That's what he said. Just preparation.
So we've taken away one fact, is that your dad said keep moving forward. This CEO of a football club, was it?
Yeah.
Is saying always overly prepare.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to go a little bit further, right? Because from this point onwards, you found that opportunity at Golden Gate, right? And then how did you manage that transition, right? Because up until this point, you were doing something in Europe, always very Europe. Suddenly you're having to come to Southeast Asia where you've never been. I heard that you'd never been to Singapore, and you had to convince your wife who wanted to move to the US at the time. There was all that thing going on, right?
Yeah.
But also, you're coming to do basically Southeast Asia investments as well, right? How was that transition, and how did you cope with it?
It was it was one of the biggest transitions in my life. Been here for 9 years now. It was very interesting looking at it from a investor standpoint, because as you mentioned, I was in Europe. I had some smaller investments in the US, in Los Angeles. So everything was not at the scale of Southeast Asia, and all of a sudden, you land in Singapore. Met Vinny and Jeff, the co-founders of Golden Gate Ventures, early on in their journey, and they were continuously talking about the opportunity in the region. I sort of felt it, but I didn't feel it until my first trip to Jakarta, because in Singapore you're still fairly sheltered. It's still very much a bubble, my first trip to Jakarta was just mind-blowing. So I spoke at a conference for, I think it was E27 Echelon, and I arrived at the conference, and part of my speaking gig was doing speed dating with startups. And just the sheer passion that they had for building their business, this was just mind-blowing for me. And that's when it clicked. And I was like, if this is representative of what all of these young kids are going to build, and not all of these ideas were amazing. Most of them were actually copycats of ideas that I've seen somewhere else. But just the sheer passion of making a better future for themselves, kind of breaking through, in some cases, glass ceilings that they would have, or having difficult arguments with their parents and saying, hey, I'm just going to build this company, bootstrap it, not going to know what's happening. That sheer level of passion, that's what inspired me to then say, you know what, I'm going to take a leap of faith and move here.
Right. Was it okay when you came here? Like, was it a seamless transition?
No, not at all. No.
It was still difficult.
Yeah, it was still difficult. It was difficult navigating. One is venture at the time was fairly early still.
Yeah.
I think it's still fairly early. In that sense, we just had to learn everything on the go,
Right.
And that was difficult. I think culturally, again, Singapore is such a hub that wasn't too hard of a transition. But then going in country across the region, that needed some transition.
time.
Yeah.
So you've probably, in your role, aside from raising capital at the GP level, you probably also get involved in due diligence and see companies and entrepreneurs that probably reach out to you. And you've probably seen some companies that have actually really scaled, right? So I want to know, what are the key elements needed for a company to really make it through scale, to become a unicorn? What are those elements? Could you summarize them?
Yeah, for me, the biggest one, and you ask different GPs, you get different answers, right? But
Yeah,
I think for me, the biggest one is always around the ability to execute. And the reason why it's so crucial is at some points in time when you scale as a company, there's always a choice. So to give an example, you're a Singapore-based company, you have the choice to expand into Indonesia. The moment you make that decision, from you executing in, building an office, hiring a team on the ground, says everything about how you run the business. So for the people that you hire, they want to understand that if you're saying I'm going to do it, are you going to actually do it? Are you able to, whenever there is, for instance, you've made a mistake in the business, whether it's a wrong business decision or a wrong strategy, are you able to then take that on and say, okay, wrong decision, we'll move in a different direction, let's cut this off and move forward. Like that ability to execute for me is key to getting to scale as a company.
All right. Are there any other aspects that you think have contributed for others, aside from being able to make those decisions and so on?
Yeah, for me, the other one is around the founder that is able to hire. I always say people better than they are. And what I basically mean is, at some point in time when you scale, you're gonna reach your own limits, in your personal limits, mentally, sometimes just in terms of capacity of what you can do. Then you need to find people that are extremely good in their field, and they're going to be better than you in that field than you are.
Right.
Having the confidence to hire them
Yeah.
and be a leader for them is what I tend to look out for.
So there's a young, aspiring tech entrepreneur that I know, right? And he has this question, so I'm going to ask it to you, right?
Yeah.
He's saying that, look, he's got a minimum value proposition, right? He's got that product, a minimum viable product. And he can do two things. Either he can just go out and spend 100K, which he has, and really build the product, but only in Singapore, which means that he'll be able to show revenue, able to show some transactions and so on. Whereas there's this other school of thought where other people are influencing him and saying, no, Singapore's a tiny market, go after tractions. It's basically a mobile app, right? So go after transactions. Yeah. And at this point, the transactions obviously means you need a lot more money, but you don't make any money either, right? So you spend it, and he doesn't have enough money to go and scale into like Indonesia and all this sort of stuff. Based on your experience, because I know this is a common founder dilemma, right? You've got the thing, which way do you go? What is your advice for people in that situation?
So first and foremost, when you think about I've made those first steps and what's going to be next for me. Traction is crucial, but there's different ways of looking at traction. So for me, it is all around if you have a product, and whether it's a B2C or a B2B product, and even if it's like a minimal viable sort of product at first, what is your interaction with your clients and with your users? For me, that is the most important thing. So what you can do is, have you tested your product in the market? So let's say you have 100 clients that are using it. Out of those 100, 50 of them keep coming back, and they keep using your product in a certain way. I'm interested in those 50 and why they are using your product. So whenever I've had so many conversations with entrepreneurs, and they always ask me, how much traction do I need to show for you to get interested in my product? I said, it's not about that number. Some companies make $1 million in ARR. Does it mean they're an amazing company? I don't know. I want to really understand, why is this client or customer using your product? What is their motivation? Are they going to come back in a year's time? So I'm more interested in the intricacies within the traction than the specific traction number itself.
The repeat transactions.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if it's happening in Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore.
No.
It can be in just one country. So therefore, it's better to do it in your hometown, wherever you are, and just do it there.
Exactly.
And then an investor like a typical VC investor will look at that and say, right, now we can scale this, or we cannot scale it, and advise from there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Another question that I have, what are LPs looking for, right?
Yeah.
Right? And how does that differ to what typical VCs are looking for, right? So, for example, I've got a question, right? Like, if there's mobile apps out there, there's marketplace ideas, there's fintechs that are broadly very similar in what they're trying to achieve, right? And then you have metaverse, right? And you have those exciting things. And I want to know, when you go out to a fundraise for your fund, what do those LPs want? Or do they just look at, like, I just need money, and good returns, or and does that change what you're looking for when you invest in companies as well? Like, what's that connection?
Limited partners come in different shapes and forms, clearly. So if I would categorize them, I say within the venture capital landscape, specifically in Southeast Asia, a lot of these LPs are actually strategic. So their reason for investing in funds like ours or of our peers is to get access to companies in the region, because they think there is a potential synergy with their core business, which could be anything, right? It could be an insurance company or an automotive company. So that's kind of one specific reason, which means that for them to invest in a fund, they would particularly look at those specific companies that are fit for their core business. And we would always then keep an eye out what in our portfolio could be useful for this LP. Other LPs are pure financial. They only care about just making returns on the capital they've invested. So they will be more hands-off. But there's another thing. They would look for co-investments, because to increase their returns, co-investments is an amazing way to get more returns out of your LP investment, right? So those are sort of two different types of LPs. There's more, but I think those are the two major categories.
Right. So in terms of inspiration, they're not very inspiring then, it sounds like. They're just very regular, just like, hey, either needs to fit my portfolio or it needs to make me money. No one's sort of going in there and thinking, what's the next big idea and how is it going to be like?
Yeah. So
it doesn't sound like that.
So the roles for LPs, because they sit on such large amounts of capital, the role for them is to enable us to find amazing companies. LPs get inspired by different things. So to give an example, if an LP out of Europe is making their first investments in Southeast Asia, it's oftentimes for them, they get all these new insights in the market here, which could be inspiring for them because they want to do more here. So one example is large manufacturing families out of Europe are looking to do more just across the region. One way to get to learn the region is making investments in funds here. So they have sort of a different angle to it. There's maybe one category which are then maybe more inspiring is family offices. So investors that have come of wealth themselves by selling their company for a few billion, and then part of their wealth goes to venture investments. Those are always very intriguing conversations because they've been entrepreneurs themselves, and they often become co-investors because they can actually speak to our entrepreneurs and sort of share their life lessons and their journey.
And how, when you go out fundraising, do you find that it's easier to raise the capital from family offices because of that that inspiration, that they just connect better with whatever you're trying to do and the co-investment opportunities that are there? Or do you find that it doesn't really make that much difference? A pitch is a pitch and you know?
Yeah, it's a different conversation. In general, sort of in the end, our job is to raise capital for our funds, and we know that there's different categories of LPs to work with. I do notice that the more engaging conversations tend to be with families because you can kind of share war stories with each other. So that does make it a bit more engaging.
All right. So when I first moved to Asia, I was obviously from London, and culturally I was like completely disconnected with Asia, right? And so when I used to go for my meetings, I would have a very sort of British approach, right? Very like, let's get to business, let's do this. And, things are different here. Yeah. I want to know, in hindsight, when you were fundraising for the first time when you came here, obviously you were an entrepreneur before this, you hadn't really done fundraising for a fund, for a GP. What lessons have you learned along the way, and how would you do things differently now compared to perhaps how you were probably doing it when you first came?
Yeah, I'd say for me, my biggest lesson specifically in the first year was around just mannerisms and culture. Just really understanding that if you talk to a large institution in Japan, it is so different than talking to a large institution in the US or in Korea or a family in Indonesia. So I guess my biggest lesson from a fundraising perspective was really around just understanding different cultural aspects within these different sort of with these different LPs across the region. I think that was one. The other one is around. I'm Dutch, so I'm typically very direct, and that doesn't always work here.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
Right? So just learning just to build a relationship over time, and I've noticed that we've had LPs that we've been speaking to for like 3 years before they actually became an LP in the fund, and that's really around building the relationship. They want to kind of see who you are, how you work, how your portfolio construction is, how do you work with your founders in your portfolio, like also who you know within their network. So a lot of kind of reference checks. So just being patient and sort of focus on building that relationship, and then eventually the money will follow.
Yeah. Do you actually have a fundraising process, like a sales process that you use to build the pipeline? I mean, is that very systematic, or what do you guys use, Prequin, or how do you build that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're at your first fund, you just do whatever you can, right? You just pick up the phone and make phone calls. Because we kind of we're 11 years in now, so we've evolved. It's definitely a very structured process where we use a CRM, we use different types of databases to understand, which institutions have which mandates. So it's definitely more of a process right now.
Right. There's this very interesting comment that I got from a contact of mine a few years ago, and I didn't know what quite to make of it at the time. What he said was that, I'm leaving Singapore or Southeast Asia. I don't think you can build a business here. It's very tough to become a unicorn here. In fact, Elon Musk would have failed here, right? If he did it here. And just going to Silicon Valley is just a completely different experience. The way that they think, the way that they give you the money, the way that the expectation, they give you the money, and they want big things in 10 years' time. Yeah. The fear of missing out is so big. Mm-hmm. So he left. Right, and I want to ask you whether a little bit about this perception of the two ecosystems, and what would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess two main comments. I'd say the first one is we tend to underestimate how young our ecosystem is. So oftentimes, even when I have conversations, whether it's fundraising for the portfolio or for the fund. Some of this conversation, and they make comparisons to other ecosystems. But if you look at the US, I mean, there's a venture ecosystem that is 50 years old. So there's so much depth, knowledge, understanding. It attracts smart people. There's so much capital available. So that is one, right? So it's hard to kind of compare sort of those different ecosystems. To his comment, yes, it is tough to build a business here because the moment you are scaling your business, you're going to go into physical boundaries, which are like country borders, right? Yeah. So you're going from Indonesia into Singapore is then relatively easier, but for instance, go from Indonesia to Vietnam, extremely hard. Building a team, culturally shifting your business model. understanding all these local intricacies, it's really tough to build a business. The good part is that once you get it, it's very hard to compete with you. So the ones that are actually at scale, they're just going to be winners because it is very hard for an outside company to compete. I think that's different in the US. I think in the US where you have, or even China or Europe for that matter, if you have one company, you find 50 others that are fairly equal. So that's another level of competition. So I think that the difficulties here are real, but not impossible. And that we're now seeing it more and more, that we're seeing more unicorns come to market.
Right. Just a little bit about the kind of investments that you at Golden Gate Ventures would be interested to look at right now. What are the things that you guys are interested in?
So we're still, as a fund, we're still agnostic. So we try to look at as much as we possibly can. Yeah. I think what has shifted in terms of our interest is that we spend more time looking at the market and looking at big trends. So just to give an example, wealth management was a huge trend in the US, in Europe, to an extent in China as well. So that's something where we spend like a lot of time in terms of what is the next step for wealth management across the region as more and more of this young demographic is getting affluent. Similar for social commerce, which kind of works in certain markets and doesn't work in other markets at all. But it's kind of interesting to see what makes it click and what doesn't make it work. So that will be another one. Something that I'm personally very interested in is the healthcare space. So now that we have so much data available, that's either sitting within the hospitals, within GPs, private clinics, within wearables, within your phone, how can we extract that data and do preventive healthcare, which saves a lot of money across the region. Food and agriculture.
That's big right now.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think the combination of agri-tech and sort of the innovation we're seeing in food, I think is going to be a big shift across Southeast Asia as well over time.
Right. So with the latest recent sort of stock market crashes and everything else, and the tech valuations kind of coming quite down, how has that impacted the way you sort of go about sort of picking up your deals, right? I mean, and entrepreneurs, because they'll think that, hey, I've got a bigger valuation and now you could probably squeeze them or whatever, right? How is that impacting your life and the fund?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations have definitely shifted over the past few months. I think the main, so there's one main thing which is everyone has a concern about. If you are fundraising this year, what's going to be how are you going to be perceived by investors? So a lot of investors are kind of slowing down their investment pace just to kind of understand what's happening in the market. When it comes to interest rates, unfortunately, the war, Russia, Ukraine.
Yeah. How has that impacted? That's like a bit of a curveball, right?
It is.
How do you control around that?
Yeah. So you can't control it. So it is fact of life. But we do have a lot of conversations, with our peers, of course, with our limited partners, on what is the impact on the market, and a lot of it is around sentiment. And sentiment basically means that are we going to still be investing at the similar pace that we did, for instance, 2 years ago or last year? Are we going to see valuations being compressed? Definitely at the later stage, but is it going to trickle down to the earlier stage as well? So I think there's a lot of things we need to take into account, even though it feels like I'm sitting in Singapore and Russia and Ukraine sounds very far away. It impacts some of the LPs that we work with, which then also impacts the way funds are able to invest. So in a way, I would say we're having a lot of conversations. We try to be supportive to founders, but also tell them, hey guys, there's a new reality. People are questioning some of these valuations, and that's something we need to take into account at this moment.
Mike, you're a very humble guy, right? And very down to earth, joy to speak to. How do you stay so humble, right? Where you've had so much success in your career to date, right? You've done things that most people haven't done, right? Probably won't do, and you've already achieved all that success, and you're still going, right? And there's probably a lot more to come. A lot of people would get to their heads. How do you stay so humble?
Having kids help. They keep me extremely grounded. Of course, support of my wife and family is important. My colleagues definitely keep me grounded, just in sort of our conversations. But I think first and foremost, going through entrepreneurship, going through an accident at a young age, just seeing a lot of stuff. It also makes that this is work. If I'm able to help others with the work that I'm doing, that's what I'm going to be doing until I'm hopefully 80 years old.
Okay. Did your dad ever teach you a lesson on staying humble or anything like
yeah.
that?
He didn't allow us to get anything to our heads. So yeah.
What was it like? Like what sort of things did you do when you were a kid to kind of make, and how are you transferring that over to your children at the moment?
Yeah, I think whenever, as a kid, so I joined the Dutch karate team at a fairly young age, and of course, as a kid, that was for me like an amazing achievement, and it definitely got to my head, back in those years.
Yeah.
And he always said, Mike, you are still going to the toilet like any other person. You still wake up like any other person. That you have achieved, kind of this level of success in sports is amazing, but don't forget to do the work, because where you are at this moment can be taken away so fast. So just keep on working, and hence it helped me kind of keep on having that mentality of we're not done yet.
Okay, so inspiring. During my research or my preparation for today's podcast, I found out that you've got this wavering belief about staying focused, right? And you're a very big advocate of this, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself focused every single day and achieve your goals? What is that formula?
So for me, it's going to be different for everyone else, but for me, it's two sports. I still try to train and exercise as much as I can. So running helps me take away a lot of the noise that I have in work or sometimes in social life. Running keeps me just on point, and it helps me really hone in on what I need to be doing next. So that is kind of my key factor.
So, Mike, everyone has insecurities and fears as well. Would you be able to share some of those as well to make it sound a bit more normal?
Yeah, sure. It's I guess it's not an easy topic to talk about. But as an example, when I moved to Southeast Asia to kind of sort of help GGV launch their second fund, where I was helpful on the fundraise, I wasn't sure if I was being taken seriously going into meetings. If you would look around, there's not many black VCs in Asia. So having that conversation was like not easy. I've had.
Are you the only one in Singapore?
I think there's two. I think Hurston is. But yeah, it's like having those conversations was difficult. I've had phone calls where literally in the phone call someone said, "Yeah, it would be great if you could get someone senior of your team." I was like, "Wait, I'm a partner." It doesn't get.
So you've had that.
I've had that. Yeah, it doesn't really get more senior, I think.
Yeah.
So just having this feeling like you are worth it to be in the room. That has always been kind of an insecurity that I had. I think as of recent, I've kind of worked through it and said, no, I'm worth it to be in this room, and I should be here. I'm at the right place. But kind of going through the process wasn't easy.
Yeah, so I think a lot more needs to be done about that, right? Because that happens everywhere. Doesn't matter which country you go, right? There's always going to be a bit of that. Yeah. And is that what Broken Chains is all about?
Yeah, it has inspired me to be more vocal about diversity and inclusion in general. And I was just surprised the moment we made the documentary and launched the documentary for kind of a wider audience. Like literally so many VCs and banks and insurance companies and large corporations were, oh man, we didn't realize the problem was this big. I was like, wow. I was hoping that you guys already knew. And being able to help and sort of open people's eyes tells me that this is still extremely important. And it's for people of color, it's for females, it's for people with disabilities. It goes so broad that it's clear that we need to have way more conversations about equality.
But perhaps it's a lot more about gender diversity at the moment, right? Rather than the racial diversity, at least from what I'm hearing in the news, right? Do you find that when you go into LP meetings that gives you a brownie point, perhaps, because you're ticking the fact that you got a diversity box on your fund? Right?
Yeah,
does that impact or?
So I don't think it impacts LP decisions, at least not that I'm aware of. So I don't think that's the case. Of course, we thought about it like, hey, is there some sort of perverse way of kind of looking at me as, oh yeah, he's one of those boxes we need to tick. Again, we haven't encountered this in actual fundraising. What I'm trying to do at least is I'm very vocal about the things that I'm doing. I just want to make sure that people perceive. And again, whether it's a person of color, whether it's a female, I just want to be perceived equally as any other person. So hence, I'm trying to give a bit more insight in what I'm doing so people could really understand like, oh yeah, when Michael walks in the room, he is as good as the person next to him.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be the minimum we should expect, right?
That should be the minimum, yeah.
Time is catching up upon us right now. Let's go for a couple of final questions, right? Out of all the people that you've worked with, right, let's talk about the CEOs in EDB first, okay? Who was the most memorable and inspiring person in that category? Can you name them?
Ooh, oh man, that's a
Who should we read up on?
Yeah, it is a good question because met so many folks and it's hard to sort of say this one person.
Yeah.
Like there's a few people. I would say so. It's a very Dutch name. So sorry for the pronunciation, but Jorien van de Herik. So he was the chairman of this football club in Rotterdam.
The one who spoke about preparation.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So he's big real estate mogul. That's what he's known for. People liked him or hated him back in those days because he kind of polarizing in terms of his views and opinions because he always was very transparent about the way he thought about things. Yeah. He didn't really, I wouldn't say care, but he was not about, okay, if I'm saying this, it might hurt your feelings. He just wanted to have a conversation. And he would be like, this is my opinion, so at least you know, and then we can have a conversation. That always inspired me. I was always very careful with my words, and I've learned from him that being careful with your words doesn't get you the most out of this conversation. Okay. Just be transparent. So that was one. I think the second one, and he passed away a long time ago, is Ruud Lubbers. So he's a former prime minister of the Netherlands. Became I think chairman for the UN for a number of years. He was inspiring for his social impact passion, and it's something that I think for a bit rubbed off on me as well. And I've always been trying to do more than just being a VC. I try to be a better person as well.
So here's another one. The best entrepreneur that you've ever worked with.
Oh my goodness, that is...
Okay, who's up there? Right?
Yeah,
because
okay.
you probably can't name one.
I can't name one. There's so many. Can I name two?
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'll name two. And they're both in Singapore.
Okay.
And as a parent, you say, we love all our children. As a VC, we love all our portfolio companies. So that being said, just tremendous respect for... So Gillian T of Homage, a health tech company out of Singapore. I think as a...
Big up to them. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think as a CEO and as a founder, she's always been super heads down focused on the business. And I feel that she doesn't get enough credit for it. But she's on her way building an amazing business within the healthcare space in a topic which people find non-sexy, which is elderly care. But it's so needed for the region. Look at all the major cities. People are getting older. People are staying at home longer. The service that she's providing for them is crucial for families. The second one would be it might be an obvious one. The second one would be Aaron Tan of Caro. Someone who's able to juggle as much as he can. whilst building a unicorn business
Yeah.
is just impressive. So if you talk about focus, something that I'm
Yeah.
very adamant about,
Yeah.
he is a prime example of focus.
Last one, your most memorable board member that you've worked with.
Ooh, oh, that's a good question. So this might be a curveball a little bit.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Seaman Ang from Rakuten Ventures.
Okay.
And the reason is because
That's a curveball.
yeah, because it's not like a name someone would expect. The reason I'm saying this is he has interest in stuff that I just don't understand. And the reason I'm saying this is he's such a curious person that he would always come to a board meeting with some insights that no one thinks of. And I like the fact that he is this curious and just thinks deeply about things. So that's why I would say Seaman would be my top choice.
Well, listen, thanks very much for coming down. I know your schedule was really tight. Hopefully it's been an enjoyable experience for you. I'm
Definitely.
sure the listeners have absorbed all that knowledge and wisdom from Mike himself. As usual, we'll leave your email address, if you're okay with that,
Sure.
at the bottom in case anyone wants to reach you. And if anybody else thinks of themselves as an inspiring entrepreneur, we'd love to have you on the show as well. Mike, just like you, if you have people in your network that you think should come over here and tell their story to all our listeners and viewers, that would be most appreciated. Thank you very much for listening. Till next time, this is Ayaz Ahmad from the Fundraisers Podcasts. Over and out.